Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the paranormal yacker. My guest on today's show is Ryan Musgrave Evans. I'll be speaking with Ryan from his home in Victoria, Australia, about his book, Children of Orion, Finding the Crypto-Terrestrials. Ryan Musgrave Evans, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Thanks for having me, Stan. Thanks for the invite. Very happy to be here, man.
To begin with, Ryan, I would like to ask you what or who are crypto-terrestrials?
That term was coined by a guy called Mac Tonnies. He passed away, unfortunately, at quite a young age. I think he was only 34 years old, 2009, rest in peace. In the final few years of his life, he had been formulating an alternative theory to the extraterrestrial hypothesis to explain the beings, alleged beings responsible for close encounter phenomena and the like. And he wasn't comfortable with the idea that the beings that are responsible for all this kind of stuff are extraterrestrial or extrasolar, or even from beyond our solar system, people often postulate. He speculated that they may be indigenous to the Earth. So he formulated this idea, crypto-terrestrial means hidden earthling. And he suggested that in a similar fashion to the way Jacques Vallée had suggested before him in his famous book, Passport to Magonia, and in particular, Jacques Vallée talked about these kinds of things, where there's a possibility as well that the non-human entities that are described in folklore and superstitions of old may well indeed be the very same beings that we're encountering nowadays in the modern abduction phenomena and UFO phenomenon. So Mac Tonnies sort of built on that kind of idea and suggested these ETs, or whatever they are, CTs, he called them, crypto-terrestrials, seem to be very, very interested in our genetics. And that's an ongoing theme in abduction narratives and lore, that Mac Tonnies is wondering why beings that are supposed to be from somewhere else, that don't have an evolutionary history related to the Earth, say, are interested in our DNA in this way. So he postulated that the crypto-terrestrials may be a sister race to Homo sapiens, quite closely related to us, that are present on this Earth, underneath our oceans, within our mountains, that have a robust technology they can use to hide from us, to manipulate our minds, to become invisible and things like that. But built into his philosophy or thesis was that they are nonetheless flesh and blood beings, based in a nuts and bolts technology that nonetheless is incredibly sophisticated to the point that we would consider it to maybe be magical. So I borrowed that term from Mac Tonnies, crypto-terrestrial, because I think it applies well to the race that I research.
Crypto-terrestrials come from the same source as us, or did they develop independently?
This is where it starts to get very complicated. Mac Tonnies himself never really got into this, and to him, the race was hypothetical. This was a bit of a thought experiment, and he didn't necessarily believe in the literal truth of them. I myself am an experiencer and have experienced these beings that I'm using the term crypto-terrestrial for. But you could use any one of a number of different words for them, really, but I've settled on crypto-terrestrial, really. Yes, they have evolved independently from us, and it does get quite complicated here because this particular race of beings is, one could say, a future version of ourselves. That depends on what you mean by time travel, though. Ideas in modern pop culture about multiple universes, you can't really turn the television on or go to the cinema anymore without seeing science fiction shows or superhero movies and things like that play with these ideas of a multiverse and multiple parallel realities or timelines coexisting. That's the notion we're really talking about here. A race of beings that is a future version of us in one respect, but what they have done is, due to a failing genomic structure, they have sought out ancient versions of themselves that are still healthier, that have not meddled yet in genetic engineering, which is one of the major issues with this particular race that I talk about, these crypto-terrestrials that have told me they're called the Mudgena, which is the same word as Wandjina in the old, in the Kimberley, Australia, with the Wandjina petroglyphs. Wandjina, Mudgena, or Charles Hall calls them tall whites as well. And I talk in my book about how this is still the same race as well. These crypto-terrestrial beings, they have been manipulating their own genomes for such a long time, seeking to prolong their lifespans, which has kind of worked, but at the same time, there's been unforeseen side effects. A human genome's a systemic, holistic thing, and if you're manipulating with it and trying to alter it in a direct, deliberate fashion, there can be unforeseen problems that come out of this, and there has been for them, and their genomic structures failing, unraveling, It takes them a long time to heal if they're injured, for example. They're susceptible to a lot of different diseases that we aren't, have a lot of allergies. And so reinvigorating their own genomes by accessing ours is their main prerogative. And in that sense, they look on us as being archaic, free-range archaic versions of themselves whose DNA they can dip into, a pool of healthy DNA to reinforce and reinvigorate themselves.
For how long a time have crypto-terrestrials been here on Earth?
Many thousands of years, but I'm not sure exactly how many. So this is where it's sort of a mind bender, really, because in a way we're talking about a possible future version of ourselves. And I say possible because it's like another timeline in a way. You could argue they're not really from our future. We're not really from their past, but rather in a Rick and Morty kind of way, they've jumped into our timeline. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit here. What was the question?
Was for how long a time
Yeah.
have DCTs been here on Earth?
Yeah, it gets quite complicated. So in a way, they're from our future, but also you could say that they've been in our past. You know, they have entered into our past and they have been present permanently here in underground facilities coexisting with us for thousands of years, but exactly how many, I'm not sure.
In your research, Ryan, you found there are close similarities between the folk beliefs of Gaelic Scotland and Ireland and the CTs. What are those similarities? And are the CTs in the folk beliefs of other cultures?
We could look here in particular at the Gaelic fairies, the race called Sheechan or Nahuishlan in particular, that means the gentry or the nobles. It was a tall, fair race of fairies in Scotland and Ireland that were thought to be subterranean dwelling, were said to whistle amongst themselves as a kind of a language, could become invisible at will, would behave in a fashion similar to poltergeist activity as well in people's houses, could paralyze people, could manipulate their minds, mesmerize, hypnotize, or cast what were called glamours over people to make people believe that they are seeing some kind of, someone that they know when in fact they aren't, or change their own appearance to the perceiver as well in certain ways if they wish to hide from the person and things like this. Also, they could levitate and glow and float about on the horizon as will-o'-wisp kind of phenomena. Now, that description I just gave of Nahuishlan is also a perfect description of what Charles Hall called tall whites. And he wrote the books called Millennial Hospitality books, series of books. There's been 6 of them. And the first 4 of those books in particular, he talks about what he calls the tall whites. And he was posted to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada in the 60s as a weather observer. He was there for 2 years and had regular and prolonged interaction with a race of tall, fair people living in the mountains subterraneously that would whistle, that would move these things around and behave like poltergeist beings, that would levitate in these glowing outfits. Identical descriptions. So that's quite a close parallel there. You have that. And then what was the other element of the question? Sorry, Stan, you also asked.
What are the similarities of them, and are they in the folk beliefs of other cultures?
Okay, yeah, I think they are in the folk beliefs of other cultures. I think to a lesser and greater extent, they are responsible for many, many, many different characters in folklore and mythology all throughout the world. When I look, for instance, at pre-Islamic Arabic stories and ideas about the jinn strike me as being very, very similar as well to the Gaelic fairies, and then also to particularly the tall whites, ETs. In Australia, as I said before, the Wandjina, there are other entities in Australian Indigenous law that are quite similar. In Zulu law, I believe there are beings called the Mantidanya, which also is a sort of a similar word to Mudjina and Wandjina as well. But they are pale beings that would kidnap people and bring them into the mountains and things. So you're getting this internationally, global phenomenon, I think. But and this also taps into ideas about how their long-term presence has really shaped a large amount of our not only folklore and superstition, but religious beliefs, spirituality, and things like that. I think they've had a major effect on us in that respect throughout the centuries. While
CTs go largely unseen and unnoticed, there have been eyewitness reports from people about encounters with them. You, Ryan, are one of those people, having had your own interaction with the CTs over the years. Could you tell me about some of those interactions, both yours and others?
When I was a child, I had a lot of high strangeness experiences, you could say, and paranormal experiences along the lines of poltergeist activity, shadow people, and also some experiences of going outside in the middle of the night when I couldn't wake up other members of my family, and there being tall, glowing beings leaping into the sky, floating back down again. Some of the dreams actually quite, disturbing as well. Once I remember I went outside and there was a dark shape on top of a boat that my dad had been building that was sitting in the yard that jumped down onto me and wrapped me up in a bag and ran off. So there's some of these sort of like very unusual experiences and poltergeist activity in waking life and this kind of stuff. And then also a memory that really is burnt into my mind of I would have been about to turn 5 years old. Saw a creature behind a tree in broad daylight that looked like it was made out of, like, its texture of its body was the same texture as the pine tree that it was hiding behind. And it had a triangular shaped face and it was peeking out at me from behind, had huge eyes. Since then, I have seen very similar things as an adult. And I now understand that that being was wearing a suit, a technologically advanced suit that's like soldier grade military suit that I call Boas suits, BOAS, after Antonio Villas Boas, an abductee from Brazil in 1957 that witnessed a similar kind of suit. So I call them Boas suits. These suits can cloak, levitate. They also have like a kind of technology in their helmet that allows them telepathic communication. And they have like a long nose piece that hangs down the front of their face, which is part of the helmet to produce, amplify, resonate sounds and things like this. Yeah, so I've had a few interactions with them wearing those suits as well. And they have glowing red eyes at night. When you actually see them, though, which I've seen multiple occasions, they're pale white skin, huge blue eyes usually, although sometimes pink. Although if it's in a medical situation, sometimes they have black eyes, like they're wearing a lens over the tops of their eyes. So this same race of beings, we've talked about Charles Hall, identified Christopher Bledsoe Sr. as definitely having interactions with this same race of beings as well. It's a famous experiencer known from the Fayetteville incident in 2007, but since the Fayetteville incident, he and his family have had a lot of paranormal experiences. So he's seen beings wearing these suits as well with the glowing eyes. He's also seen them without their suits. He's been taken into craft. A lot of experiences similar to my own. I've been taking on board craft as well. But he's also had that in tandem with what people might normally think of as being more haunting phenomena. Disembodied voices, televisions turning themselves on and off, boots on the roof at night, or footsteps coming down the stairs, people standing over you in the middle of the night. These kinds of what people would normally think of as being like if your house is haunted and things like high strangeness. These are linked because the beings themselves, when they're cloaking, can appear as the shadow people. Sometimes they have sort of like a look to a heat shimmer to them when they're cloaking, kind of like in the movie Predator. Sometimes they're completely invisible, but sometimes they still have a dark presence or cast shadows, even if you can't see them otherwise. And Kelly Kale in Australia had experiences in the 90s, and she was quite famous there for a while, but she's gone underground now. I don't believe she has anything to do with ufology and whatnot anymore, but she wrote a book called Encounter, I believe it was. She goes into a lot of detail about the being she had interactions with, which again were wearing these suits with the glowing eyes. She didn't recall seeing them without their suits, but another woman that was abducted along with her at one stage does remember seeing them without them, and they had the same white face that I've seen. An aspect of the interactions with them is that they'll suppress your memories if they decide that they think it's necessary. It's my opinion that many people across the face of the earth are having interactions with this particular race all the time, but not a huge amount of people are allowed to remember. And they don't normally make mistakes. So if you do remember these interactions, they're doing it purposely. Their reasons for doing it are best known to themselves a lot of the time, but they often have a long-term goal in mind and thinking about perhaps different ways that a person that they're interacting with will then give rise to certain influences in the world later on, and then we'll move on from that, and there might be some kind of snowball effect. Off the top of my head right now, I'm just trying to think of other people that have definitely experiences of the very same beings. There's been a few people that have contacted me that have had very similar experiences to myself that have read my book.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy Children of Orion, Finding the Crypto-Terrestrials, how can they do that?
Amazon. Available on Amazon as paperback, hard.
So they could purchase the book through Amazon.
Amazon, yeah. Amazon will just be there. If you type in Children of Orion, Finding the Crypto-Terrestrials, or type my name, Ryan Musgrave Evans, you'll find it easily, yeah.
Ryan Musgrave Evans, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. I wish you much success with Children of Orion.
Thanks so much, Stan. Thanks for the invite. It's been fun.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed watching part 1 of my interview with Ryan. In part 2, we'll be discussing the advanced spacecrafts used by crypto-terrestrials, the telepath technology they use to communicate with us, the dynamics involved in them interbreeding with us, and how they hold the answers to our past, present, and future selves. So that you don't miss it, have access to past interviews, and be amongst the first to receive new interviews when they're released, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.